Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and it's a Monday. As you all know, Mindset and Motivation Monday. We are going to deliver in a big way today because today's guest has started a company that I absolutely love the work that they're doing. And I'm going to tease it to you really quickly because here's the thing. How would you like to build superior levels of unshakable confidence? How would you like exceptional levels of competitive energy? And how much would we all like to just start getting stuff done? Well, that's what today's guest is all about. Let me tell you about him. His name is Russell Raath. He's originally from Zimbabwe. Russell has been working with teams all around the world for almost 3 decades. Formerly, he spent time helping to build a formidable consulting business at Deloitte Consulting in New York before working alongside famed Harvard Business School professor Dr. John Kotter, where he ran Dr. Kotter's transformation consulting business. He finds himself setting highly ambitious personal challenges to see where they will take him. Russell is far braver than I am because most recently he found himself swimming 8 kilometers in the cold water off of Cape Town, South Africa. Russell is an incredible dude. He's an incredible entrepreneur. He's got an incredible story. His company is called the Ambition Company, which we're all going to learn so much from him today. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview today with Russell Raath. All right, Russell, we've got so much we're going to dive into today. You and I were already geeking out before we hit record, but officially, welcome to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Oh, thanks, Brian. It's great to be here and spending time with you and everybody else this Monday.
Heck yes, super excited. Russell, there's so much that I could say about not only you personally, but the work that you do through your company. But listeners always love to hear the backstory. Give us that backstory. Who the heck is Russell? How'd you get here?
Well, I was, as you said, originally from Zimbabwe. So I started off my career actually after graduating school. I had a degree in law and finance, but found myself doing process engineering, consulting work essentially for underground gold mines and steel manufacturers and rubber processing plants. And that's when I learned something that's pretty fundamental. And that was this idea of a value chain, right? How something gets turned into value that a consumer is willing to buy or pay money for. And it was through that process that I kind of really loved this idea of how we can improve businesses as a force for good. Because I believe business is a force and can be a huge force for good. And through the process of doing that, I got to see good businesses and not so good businesses. I got involved in tech a little bit, and that's what facilitated my move over to New York. I came over here in 1998 and spent probably the next, sort of 20 odd years in and around New York and then back down between New York and North Carolina. As you said in the intro, working for Deloitte Consulting, where I spent a lot of time in the financial services sector and a little bit in the consumer world. And then left and spent a very short amount of time at Bank of America when we were at the process of doing the integration with Merrill Lynch and Bank of America on the wealth side of the business, which was just fantastic. But had an opportunity, a calling that came about to join John Kotter and his business out of Cambridge, leading large-scale transformations. And that's when we really got to sort of hone the craft even more because I realized so much about business is about people. And so I shifted from tech to understanding that the tech is often not the problem. I mean, sure, we're living in a world with social media and data and privacy and all those things that are problems. But usually when it comes to business performance, it's not the tech. It's how people embrace that and the culture that comes with it. And that just set me on a complete path of looking at what great organizations look like, what they do well, and how we can set them up and their teams up for huge success. So I started the Ambition Company about 2.5 years ago. It's been a great ride, just a fantastic ride, doing great work with bold, ambitious leaders who are not scared to set a big target, frankly, and a big outcome.
Yeah, Russell, I love that overview, particularly because to me, I love looking at the contrast. And when I hear you talk about your own story, you first start with, working on business processes, and obviously big business, Deloitte is as big as they come. But then that transition to academia, I feel like it's so evident in the work that you do with the Ambition Company that you kind of do have that academic approach. You mentioned about how important the people are. Obviously, people are what make up academia, but also you do use a scientific approach, it seems, in the way way that you talk about getting the most out of people. Talk to us about the groundwork behind the Ambition Company. How do we even talk about it? Is it a science-backed company, a people-backed company, a business results company? How do you talk about it with people?
Oh, that's a really interesting. No one's ever asked me that question before. It absolutely is a business results company. But one of the things that I determined not long into my journey sort of doing this work was that we know more and more today than we ever have known about how humans perform, how we perform as individuals, how we perform in groups. That's partly as a result of the incredible work that's being done in the domains of neuroscience, neurobiology, but also behavioral economics and behavior science. And I'm a big believer in, and this is part of my entrepreneurial journey, of investing in myself. And as we invest in ourselves, we kind of grow our capabilities and our insights and our teams. And one of the best programs I attended was a program on behavioral science in business at Columbia. And Steve Martin, who's just a wonderful guy, great friend now, and just a smart brain on all things behavioral science, just sort of opened up a whole perspective of how we can intentionally design behavior and understand how people perform. And I supplement that then with some other work that I did, kind of gained more investment in what we do by spending time with BJ Fogg. And BJ is originally out of the Stanford Design Lab, and he ran that for a long time. And his work around how you can intentionally create behavior design, which is something that in so many instances with the work that I did around organization transformation had kind of been ignored. What I would see happen is teams would decide this is what we want to have happen. So let's create a message and kind of quote unquote cascade it out to everybody and tell everybody what we want them to do. But if you have children, or if you've been around children, or if you know children, you know that that's not the way to get things done. You don't tell kids what to do, because most of the time they kind of find a reason to do it another way. What you want is for people to do something because they want to do it. And that became a huge intersection point for me. So you bring in this dimension of neuroscience and behavioral economics as well, couple that with intentional behavior design, and go, well, what does this mean for an organization of 1,000 people or 10,000 people? Can we have 10,000 people designing their own behaviors? Well, absolutely we can. And that's what sets these teams apart from those that are sort of at a point where people are coming in doing what they're being told to do with less enthusiasm, less gusto, or those that are coming in just hugely energized to get something done because they're passionate, they care about it, and they have a little bit of agency in terms of how they do it. So 100% a business results company that's underscored by what we loosely call the science of ambition, like understanding what that is and how to make it really work as an advantage for you.
Yeah, Russell, now you're dropping all my favorite terms that describe why I love being an entrepreneur. You're talking about passion, you're talking about behavior, you're talking about ambition, and of course, with your company named the Ambition Company, I feel like ambition is particularly an ingredient that I think it makes sense to start with, and it's right on your website. I'm so excited for listeners to go to your website after our session here today, which, spoiler alert, it's theambitionco.com. The link will be down below. But I love, you've got so much awesome content on there. From the copy, you also have a video there, but so much of your messaging, it's right there on your website. It starts with ambition. Russell, why is ambition one of those key ingredients? Because I can think of a lot of key entrepreneurial and business ingredients. I'll be totally transparent with you here. I don't think I think of ambition as the first and foremost. I've always loved that quote, shoot for the moon. If you miss, at least you'll be in the stars, or whatever that quote is. So I understand the value of ambition. I think that entrepreneurs by nature are dreamers. We are ambitious in theory. I think we get lost in the execution. Navigate me through these waters of how ambition meets up with us actually taking action and accomplishing things.
100%. Well, thanks for the shout out on the website too. The website's being redone right now. It's not exactly the way I would like it to be, and it's been like that for a little while now. So we need to kind of put some more energy behind that, but we just haven't had the time. And you know what it's like as an entrepreneur, you're doing 100 things. So that is coming. But look, one of the things that I realize quite often is that when teams would talk about wanting to do something different, and I've worked on massive transformations, I mean, multi-continents, hundreds of thousands of people in these teams, right down to small startups. And in fact, one of the startups is when I had one of my most insightful lessons, and we'll get to that probably in a little bit. But one of the things I realized is that most of the time they started with not ambition, but strategy. And it seems like we had amplified and elevated this term strategy and the strategy function and building a strategy to being the most important thing. And what I realized over time is that ultimately that became again, an exercise that was done by a couple of people in a dark room in a corner of an office, or maybe a few more people. But it wasn't everybody's strategy, and it wasn't everybody's desired outcome. The strategy, which often talks about how you're going to do something, is actually less important than where you're trying to get to. And, I think we can reflect. I used to talk a lot about JFK and his moonshot speech. When he gave that moonshot speech at Rice University, what he didn't tell everybody was that there had been hundreds upon thousands of pages of congressional reports that had gone in to look at the feasibility of getting to the moon. When he gave that speech, it was a relatively short speech that energized the world and set our hearts on fire. If you listen to captions of that speech anywhere, you'll hear the language that's just so evocative about wanting to go there because no one else has gone there. And because no one else has gone there, we can be first and we can get there before anybody else. And we choose not to do it, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And we choose to do these hard things. That was the message that got everyone excited, not the strategy, not the congressional reports that said how we're going to do it. And it's true of every social movement and uprising that we've seen. It's not the strategy of how to do it. It's the ambition of the outcome. And it's the language and how that evokes the feeling in people. And so the challenge that I've often said to teams is don't start with the strategy. Unfortunately, we spend a lot of time at business school and we elevate that function. There's often a chief strategy officer. I'm not suggesting that there needs to be a chief ambition officer. I think that's the role of leaders. But we've elevated these roles. And so what do? We spend a lot of time on the rational, on the logical of building a plan that sounds good that we can sell to investors and shareholders and analysts. But in the process, we take out all of that emotional, compelling kind of drive that's going to get people really excited. And so what we tend to find is when we choose the path of strategy first, and this is why we say ambition must come first. When we choose the path of strategy first, you end up with a pretty logical, solid, grounded strategy that makes sense to a lot of people. But a lot of people look at it and go, all right, well, that makes sense. Just like what we did last year made sense, and just like what we're probably going to do in 2 years' time makes sense. It doesn't evoke in me any kind of energy or drive to do anything differently. And that's why I feel we've got to start with ambition. That there's an energy there that if you can unleash that, you suddenly find, if you've got a team of 100 people or a team of 1,000 people or whatever your team size is, you then start finding more of those people getting attached and engaged with that message and wanting to make it happen, which makes your role as a leader, frankly, a lot easier when you've got people saying, how can I show up today to make that aspiration happen? How can I show up to help us get there? Instead of going, all right, I've been told what we got to do, and we got to, kind of get 2 percentage points down on our expenses and 2 percentage points up on our sales. That makes sense to thrive in business, but it doesn't drive any of us personally. So the language there is really important, Brian, and I think that's the part that I want to emphasize, and I do emphasize with all of our clients. Like, let's not start with strategy. We'll get there. But first, what's your moonshot? And India just did this, right? India landed on the South Pole of the moon. And it was incredible. I mean, I just think it's phenomenal how they did that with a budget of about $70 million, which probably sounds like a lot, especially if you're a startup. But consider that the US government funded NASA to the tune of $24 billion last year. And we kind of haven't landed on the South Pole. So you kind of look at what's possible when you can create this compelling drive. I just think it's way, way more of a superpower than strategy or anything else that you might have.
Yeah, Russell, it's actually fascinating. I'll be honest with you. When I asked you that question, I didn't view the opposite or kind of don't want to say opposing force because I think these two work together, but opposing motivator. I didn't picture it being a question of strategy versus ambition, but the way that you illustrate it, what it invokes in me as, I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years now. And what I found is that the older, the more mature I've gotten as an entrepreneur, the wiser I've gotten as a person and as an entrepreneur, the thing I've realized is the smartest people on planet Earth are not married to strategy. And I've actually never seen that until the way that you illustrated it. I love that you use the startup as the example because in all of my businesses today, which is drastically different from when I was in my early 20s, all my businesses today, my business partners and I, or partners that we're bringing in, people we're collaborating with, we all kind of jointly sit around the table and we say, we don't care how we get there. Like, this is where we want to go. We are not married to that at all. And I love that you learned it. The illustration you brought up through you sitting in a startup. Russell, it's fascinating to picture you sitting in a startup. Startups so often fall into one of those two categories. This is the way we do things. Look at Blockbuster. I know they weren't a startup when they eventually died, but we sell DVDs and VHSs. That's what we do. Whereas Netflix said, we just want to get as many people as possible watching good entertainment. And they weren't married to it. Netflix also started out, same strategy. Right. I want to hear more. You kind of teased us with... Go ahead.
Here's another example that I kind of think is interesting. When I first heard it, I was just astonished. It kind of took me a couple of hours just to kind of get my head around it. And it was what I think was the jiu-jitsu move of the year, the business move that kind of should surpass all others. If there was an award for the best business move, this would probably be it, in my opinion at least. So Overstock.com, and we all know Overstock.com as being the place that you go to for inventory that hasn't sold, right? So you go there because some store sort of uses it as a clearinghouse in a way. But for a long time, it's been way more than that. That's what it started out as 20 some years ago. But that's not what it is today, but that's still what the brand is today. And Overstock are trying to expand their reach and do more and become a brand that's known as more than just Overstock. Well, at the same time, there's this fledgling company that's been a darling of the stock market for a long time, but suddenly hits hard times, called Bed Bath & Beyond. And throughout the pandemic, of course, retail, like everything else, took its toll. And so Bed Bath & Beyond that are carrying this huge portfolio of retail stores, and they've got inventory in these stores, and you go to the store and it's like not always a great experience. And they sell bed and bath, but then they start selling food because they can't quite figure out whether they should or shouldn't. They start selling Halloween stuff because that's, of course, what you do when you go into a bed bath shop, right? No. But nonetheless, they have this cost basis in terms of their stores and their inventory, and an experience that consumers are moving away from because we don't really go shopping anymore. We do that online. So what happened with Overstock, because they looked at this, and Bed Bath & Beyond then declared bankruptcy. And this is the jiu-jitsu move. For, I think it was like $21.5 million, Overstock.com acquired all of the assets of Bed Bath & Beyond. That means they got a incredibly loyal customer base, because people who love Bed Bath & Beyond love Bed Bath & Beyond. They acquired this this list, essentially a mailing list and all the rest of it, all the people, the loyalty program from Bed Bath & Beyond. And they were able to take that, leverage that entire asset, the good part of Bed Bath & Beyond, not the debt, and they could shift it into the operation. So if you now type in Overstock.com, it'll take you to bedbathandbeyond.com. Now that to me is the power of, sure, how they executed is what's important, but they weren't so tied to a strategy that said we've got to make Overstock.com the best company. Like, let's just lose Overstock.com. We're now going to become Bed Bath & Beyond because we serve more customers with way more Bed Bath and lots more beyond, and they can kind of get way out there. And I think if they'd gone out and said to their team at Overstock, how do we go out and penetrate more and get more consumer demand and kind of get more customers in the door, they might have followed a more traditional path of saying, well, let's do some more email campaigns, or they don't have a retail footprint, so you don't have stores. But instead, they weren't tied to what had been their strategy. This opportunity presented itself, and it's like, this affords us the opportunity to hit the moon. Let's go for it. So, I just think those examples are ones that you don't see often enough, but it's when you look outside the strategy, because acquiring Bed Bath & Beyond was probably never on Overstock's strategy until it was. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Which, Russell, I think that part of this, what you're revealing, I always remind listeners in these sessions with awesome entrepreneurs like you that success leaves clues. And the fact that you are this obsessed, not only about the work that you do, but you love the business landscape. You're always looking for lessons. That's why I want to go back. It's something that you kind of teased us with, your most insightful lesson from the startup that you were involved with. I want to hear that story. Take us back there, because I can only imagine Russell sitting there, seeing a company that's focused more on strategy. We're talking about not being married to these things. Lay that lesson on us.
It's kind of a meta lesson, Brian. So I was new in my journey as an entrepreneur starting the Ambition company. And this company was a startup that was new in their journey as a fintech company. And so we got I'd been doing what I've been doing for a long time, but not in the space that I was doing it at. And the leadership team was somewhat dysfunctional. I'd actually gone in, they'd called me up and said, listen, can you help us out over a period of a couple of months? We just need to tighten up. We need to know what we're going after. And we feel that sometimes, and I think this is true sometimes, an external perspective is helpful. It'll be challenging and so on. And so I went in, and this team was absolutely focused on strategy. I mean, they'd got a lot of funding from a private equity firm to kind of help them get set up in business, and they needed a big amount of capital to kind of float. So they got all of that set up. But what they started to do is find the point at which they were having these conversations that felt too much like a startup, right? They weren't actually making the progress they needed to make, because the challenge is you've got to have massive ambition, but you've also got to get stuff done. And they were at a point where they were allowing the dysfunction of the team to almost mask the lack of progress that they were making. I was new in my role too, right? So as a business owner, and so as you get started, you kind of, every opportunity for revenue is an important one. And so I reached a point in the conversation where I thought, I think I need to call this. I really think I need to challenge the direction that they're going in. But there was something in me that kind of also held me back. So I thought, well, if I do that and they don't like it, they're probably going to boot me out, right? Because I tend to speak my mind, and I wouldn't have been untactful, and I wouldn't have been unpleasant in how I said what I said, but what I felt needed to be said. So I held back on saying it, and what that meant is that they spent another cycle going down the strategy path and figuring out how to map certain functions together, instead of just going back and saying, you know what, we're not on the same page here. We're not on the same page with the sort of company we're trying to build, and hence with the people that we're hiring, we're not talking about it the same way. The way we go to the market to our customers, we're not talking about it the same way. And guess what? Everybody that we're coming into contact with is seeing that dysfunction. I should have called that out sooner, and that was my biggest takeaway. Where if they probably lost a quarter or two in terms of their progress, and I'm thrilled to say they're doing incredibly well now. But I can't help but thinking how much better they could have got done, or how much faster they could have got there if we'd had that conversation sooner. And that was my lesson, right, about being true to my own model that I had built, what I knew to be right, but also being concerned because as a startup guy, I'm looking at it going, I've got mouths to feed. I don't want to upset the client. And it was that fine line, that fine balance. So it's a small lesson that I had learned just in terms of being true, but I walked away from that wishing I'd done something differently. And that's never a good way to walk out of a session that you have with a client.
Yeah, Russell, the thing I particularly love about that lesson that you learned is obviously you learned the important lesson of being true to yourself, the model that you had built, but also weaved in there is you revealed parts of Russell, the person, not just the entrepreneur, that also impact your work and the way that you interact with clients. One of those such things is you revealed it, and I can totally believe you on this, Russell, is that you speak your mind. You're not going to sit in a room and just let people wander with their minds, with their thoughts, with their strategies. You're not going to let that happen. And that's why I also think it's fascinating. The more, and obviously I've looked into your business a lot to prep for today's session. I'm excited for listeners to get that chance, but they may not realize that you have, it's the ambition model, which I want to hear you talk about in just a second. But before we get there, to me, I'm already having this conversation with you today. I'm already starting to see your personality show up in so much of your messaging. For example, I thought it was fascinating when I read that superior competitive energy is an ingredient that you want to inject into teams and high performers. I'm a competitive person. I value that trait. Russell, if you and I were in person right now, we'd be gambling.
Yeah,
exactly. And so we'd be competitive about anything and everything. I want to hear how those ingredients, unshakable confidence, competitive energy, how those things factor into it. And how does all this stuff, because I haven't seen the ambition model in play, lay it all on us.
Right. So let's go there. So we've identified 3 observable outcomes. These are things that you will see. These are things that when we work together, we want to create, because this is the hallmark of success that's going to really help you accelerate. So the first one is a leadership team that's able to really exhibit what we call this idea of unshakable confidence. And unshakable because as leaders, you're walking it's really hard, right? And as many perspectives exist on leadership as books have been written, as people as there are on the earth, right? I think anybody who's in a point of influence in an organization is a leader. Now, you could get sort of minutia around, well, is a manager a leader and is a leader a manager? Like, I'm rolling all of this up into you have a role to play, whether you're a manager, a leader, or an influencer of people. And that's who I'm talking to here. So you got to have this level of unshakable confidence at the top of the house. Now, unshakable confidence is you have confidence in your insights and your predictions and the calls that you have made. Because what teams need to know is that when they're getting on that ship, the captain or the steward, or what do you call a person who's captain of a ship? The captain of the ship knows where they're going. and they've got the path set out. And sure, there might be, kind of turbulent waters ahead, but they're going to figure out they're experienced enough to navigate that. They know that even if they lose, if they're trying to navigate by, let's say there's no satellite, but they're trying to navigate by the sun and the moon and whatever else, but if there's cloud cover, they can still do that. So as a leadership team, you want to exude this unshakable confidence. And that means you know enough about your markets, your market position. I'm not saying you have to do incredible amounts of research on this, but you know enough about your market position, what you are good at, what your genius is, what's the thing that you bring out that no one else can. And you know that well enough so that you can then make some calls on where you want to go. Again, just think about JFK's moonshot speech. He didn't say, well, if we can go maybe to the moon, that would have inspired us with less confidence than anything else. Instead, he said, we're going to the moon. Never been done before, but we're going there. And the US went there. And I think that's the kind of confidence. It's not an arrogance. This is an important kind of hallmark here. It's not an arrogance, but it's a confidence that is unshakable. Like there's no question we're going to be number 1 or number 2 or number 4 in our industry. And it doesn't have to be number 1, by the way. So we talk about creating an aspirational ambition as part of this confidence that helps frame it. But there's an important piece here, Brian, that I kind of want to underscore. And I was talking to a couple of people recently, and they were sort of on my case a little bit about ambition and why would I be on about ambition and going after more and achieving more. And I want to qualify ambition for a second. It doesn't mean that you have to be number 1. I can be ambitious if I'm in 3rd place and I want to get to 2nd place. I use the example of somebody who went out and wanted to impact the poor people of the world and make an impact in their lives. Mother Teresa was incredibly ambitious with what she wanted to achieve. But so too is somebody like Putin. Right. And so the character that underscores this team is really important because that character is ultimately going to shape that aspirational ambition. And so you can identify a bad character. You can identify an unsavory character, but we will spend time when we work together with a client to say, let's just make sure that our drivers, that our motives here are good, because what we don't want is a level of ambition that just says we're going to go out and make a boatload of profit and exploit the world. I don't work with companies like that. I want to work with companies that want to do good. So the first thing is you've got to create that unshakable confidence, because then when your teams feel it and you have a place that you want to go, well, that helps you move, and it helps you move quickly with determination. Because if you know where you're going, you can be determined about it. You're not iffing and umming and ahhing. I have teams right now that I'm kind of helping to gauge through processes where they might take 3 or 4 weeks to make a decision on something. That's because they're not sure on where they want to go. If they had more certainty around where they wanted to go, they'd be able to move more quickly, more and with more determination. So that's the first piece, around having the confidence. Once you've got that, you then want to create energy around that. I'm a big energy person, right? So I very much kind of want to see a team exhibit the excitement that they have around something. And I talk about competitive energy because I think this is a huge differentiator and a strength for most organizations, or at least it can be. So you can create something that people look at, new prospects, clients will look at going, I don't know how the hell they do it, but that's who I want to work with. Or you have new talent coming in saying, well, I have 2 offers here. They're both the same, or one's actually maybe a bit better. But this is a place where I just feel a level of energy. And you're creating that environment where, frankly, you're going to win because you've got those attitudes and you've got that energy in your organization. And that's what you need. And so you need to be deliberate about that. And that's where we talk about behavior design. How do you help people to design behaviors that are going to help them demonstrate the energy that they have? And I think particularly now we're seeing extortionate rates of employee disenchantment. They're dissatisfied. They're not happy coming into the office and all that kind of stuff. That's the narrative in the media. That's not true of every company. There are a lot of companies out there where energy is high, where people love what they do. And I think you're going to find that that's the competitive energy that's ultimately going to win. And then you take that energy with the clarity of focus and the determination to go fast, and you put it together and you start moving. You get stuff done. And I phrase it this way, can you swiftly and consistently deliver what you promise? So that could be to shareholders, certainly to customers, the experience you want to create for your employees. Can you deliver that? Because if you're not delivering that, if you miss your earnings to your shareholders, and if you're a small company, that's probably yourself or your investors, if you're a public company, it's certainly your shareholders. Are you able to deliver every single day the way you need to deliver? And if you can't, well, then we've got some work to do. So you put those three things together, and that's really what the ambition playbook is all about. How we create the aspirational ambition that gets you going with confidence, how we create the energy, and then the things we need to do to put in place to maybe just change a few old habits that have got in the way of executing reliably and consistently and quickly every day.
Russell, I love that overview, and it gets me so excited. And you know what? That actually leads me into where I want to go from here. Russell, there's a big disclaimer about my next question, which is I don't exactly know how to communicate this to you, but I think it's an important learning opportunity for listeners. And if there's one person on the world or in this planet who will get what I'm trying to articulate, I'm pretty sure it's you. Because here's the thing. Once upon a time, a very wise entrepreneur, he's one of my closest entrepreneurial friends. He runs a multi-7-figure business. He said to me, because we were talking about something, and he's like, Brian, you're always excited about business growth, about doing things, about taking action. And I said, well, yeah, aren't you? And he said, no, a lot of this stuff gives me anxiety. A lot of this stuff makes me nervous. And I said, well, why? I was like, what does that even mean? I can't even relate to that. What does it mean? And he goes, well, I feel like this, I feel like that. And I'm like, that's excitement. And he goes, wait, maybe that's it. Maybe you're just confusing these other real life emotions for excitement. And Russell, hearing you talk about how energy drives so much of what you do, we've seen it on display here in today's episode. You are excited about all this stuff too. That's why I can see why some people get confused about ambition, where they're just like, Russell, what are you doing here? And you're like, no, we're excited about where we're going and we're going to get there, not married to strategy, but married to that vision. I think that this is something we don't talk about in the world of entrepreneurship enough, is that how exciting this stuff is. And we allow ourselves to feel trapped by pseudo emotions that we think are holding us back, when in reality, if we tap into that inner excitement, the three ingredients, the unshakable confidence, the competitive energy, and then getting stuff done, I think that excitement, that energy begets more excitement, more energy. And that's where I think momentum lies. But I'm curious your take on all this stuff, because I've never known how to articulate it.
So Brian, there's two ways to think about this. And I'll talk about it first from as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, because I think that's a lot of your audience here. But then there's also my clients, a lot of whom are not entrepreneurs, right? They're employees in organizations. And I think there's an answer for both. Look, I've struggled as well as an entrepreneur. I take on a lot. I have what I would call vocational ADD. That's not to take away from people who have ADD. I just find that I need a lot of things going on. I recently brought on somebody to help me out as an executive support person, and she is just amazing, right? Amanda kind of takes care of everything in ways that I never thought to, because she's able to clear the stuff that is really important and that I would get tied up in. But you're absolutely right. There's an idea here about, look, I want to have my ambition, like my personal ambition, my aspiration is that I want to take my 30 years of experience and impact as many people as I can, because I believe business is a force for good. And that if we can help teams set themselves up for even better outcomes, it's better for everybody. And so I want to leverage those insights from 30 years of corporates, of big consulting, where I've seen gnarly stuff at a very, very sort of at enterprise levels, and make that accessible in a place that, frankly, I love playing in, which is where I can work directly with the C-suite, with teams, with founders, to help them accelerate and turn their business from one thing into something else. That's my aspiration. I get really excited about that. So being able to talk about it for me is, I love it. I don't consider work and non-work. They all just blend for me as an entrepreneur. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people in your audience as well. But it does shift. And I had an interesting chat recently with somebody, and we were talking about how in the space of, for instance, business growth, if everybody is vested in that business growth, it could drive a very different outcome to where some people feel vested and some people don't. And if growth is a priority for you, and it's not for everybody, I would argue it almost should be, but it's not for everyone. If it's a priority for you, want as many people vested as possible. And this person said to me, oh, right. Think like an owner and think like an entrepreneur and act that way. And I kind of paused and I said, I don't actually think you want that. And he said, no, I do. I want everybody to act like an entrepreneur. And I said, well, that's different from acting like an owner. I said, if you have everybody genuinely seeing how they can get to share in the upside of the growth or whatever it is that you're trying to create, that's one thing. But being an entrepreneur myself, I wouldn't want to be in an organization with 100 of me, because the chaos and I mean, there's chaos up here, right? There's a lot of stuff going on up here that I'm not proud of, because the brain runs in mysterious ways. I take on too much. I pivot halfway through something before it's even finished. It drives a lot of people crazy, right? Because, Russell, we haven't even finished that, and you're kind of starting to come up with the next thing already. You don't want that when you're trying to execute and go fast, because remember what I said at the beginning, part of the idea of having unshakable confidence is that you've got certainty around what you're going to do. So I've struck a balance, right? I know I'm certain around what my aspiration is. I'm not that certain exactly on the iterations to my playbook, because I make those based on insights I get from clients and so on and so forth. So I do think that there's a difference between entrepreneurialism and ownership. So that's one distinction I'd make. But the other one is that there's no question in my mind that without the aspirational ambition, you're not going to have the energy. And without the energy, you can't make momentum. And without momentum that's going to drive results, you're not going to feel enthused and encouraged and motivated and inspired. And so it just becomes a little bit of a fulfilling circle that I think makes sense from a behavioral point of view and from a logic point of view, that we absolutely have to try and build. And I think those companies that you see sort of really expressing bad morale and sort of just bad sentiment are those that have struggled in any one of those dimensions. But I'd argue it starts with ambition. They haven't been clear about what they want to be, and then they tolerate too much of the bad stuff that gets in the way. And that's a big thing. You know, if you tolerate the bad stuff, you let it in, you let it stay in, you're setting yourselves up for failure in a lot of cases.
Yeah, Russell, I'll tell you what, the more we've talked about ambition here today, what I'm really walking away from our session with is, you know, we wrap all these other essential ingredients to life, to human behavior, to performance, to entrepreneurship, to ownership that you talked about. We talk about all these things, and I can see all the ingredients that are necessary. We've both talked about passion, excitement, energy, all that, but I can see how if those things are all matches in a matchbox, they still require that spark. And what I'm seeing from you is ambition is that spark that lights everything else on fire. So I absolutely love that. Is there something you want to add to that?
No, I you know, it's interesting. A lot of people are uncomfortable to go there, because it is certainly from my manifestation. When I see and I hear ambition, it's not necessarily jumping up and down and parties and all that, but it's a genuine sense of emotion. You know, somebody asked me, I do some coaching with senior leaders, and somebody asked me not so long ago, how to know that they cared enough about something. Like, do I really care about this? And I thought about that for a while, and I've always thought the things that I care most about evoke a very physical reaction. I'll either laugh, I'll wince, or I'll cry, right? I'm a softie with movies. Like, I'll cry in Disney movies. I don't even watch Disney movies that much anymore because the kids are older. But, you know, so you look at these physical and physiological responses that we have. And for whatever reason, a lot of leaders seem to think that those shouldn't apply in business. You know, I've got to show up and I've got to be hardcore and I've got to work hard and I've got to put my armor on, you know, not to quote Sia, but to quote Sia. And I'm going to show up in the workplace differently. The problem is our human emotion, our human brain doesn't switch from work to non-work. We bring so much of the non-work stuff into work, and vice versa. You go home, you've had a bad day, you take it out on everyone at home. I mean, that's because there's no, the line is porous. In fact, there is no line. And so the ability for us to actually take those emotions into work is really important. And I, for whatever reason, find that so many leaders are just not comfortable going there. They want to do a town hall or an all hands call, and they want to show up a certain way, and they want talking points. And I think, hold on, how would you talk about this if you're talking to your best mate? How would you talk about this when you're talking to your partner? At the end of the day, we've got to bring those things together. And so it's not a matter of trying to be one thing at work and another thing at home. You've got to have the passion and determination. And if it fuels you at home and it'll fuel you at work, well, then you're onto something. And that's what makes entrepreneurs, because we go after things that we care about, and we go after things that kind of make us feel something, as opposed to just having a job. Like, we care about our jobs. We care about what we're building and the impact it's going to have. And I suggest that, you know, more corporate leaders could embrace some of that demeanor and just sort of honest, transparent view of kind of how they feel at home and at work.
Woof. Russell, you're hitting me in all the feels today. For me, it's goosebumps. I literally have goosebumps all over my arms right now because this stuff, at the end of the day, we are deep carers. And I think that's such a key trait of everything that high performers in any industry. You want to talk athletics, you want to talk corporations, you want to talk entrepreneurship, anything in life, parenting, I can imagine anything. If you care deeply and you're one of those that bring it there from one crier to another, Russell, I totally hear you on that. So I love that. Gosh, there's so much that we talked about here today. So many different elements and ingredients that are going to give every single listener so much food for thought. Russell, I can see why you're amazing at what you do. Part of what you're amazing at, I'm sure, is really extracting that genius and extracting the big actionable takeaways. And that's why I always give guests the hardest part of these lessons, which is, as we're wrapping up here, listeners have heard all this stuff. What's the one thing that they're saying, gosh, Russell's really challenging me to up-level my game, up-level my performance, up-level the way that I think, the way that I behave? What's the one thing that you want listeners to do from here to start moving forward in their lives and in their businesses?
We have to up-level, right? There's no question. It's not just a human stake survival thing, but it's frankly what we should do for our world and our planet and kind of what we leave behind. I would have given you a different answer to this question if we'd met over the video podcast thing back in February or March. But as you said, in early May of this year, I did this big epic swim, and it was cold, right? The water was really cold. It was about 54 Fahrenheit. I was in there for just over 3.5 hours. Yes, there's sharks to contend with and everything else. And I thought it was all about the swim. And I did it because I was never a big athlete or a big swimmer kind of guy. I just wanted to do something that would push me, and I was really determined to do it. And kind of from a number of personal dimensions, I set that as my goal. But the swim actually wasn't the story. What was the story was how I needed to compartmentalize those things I could control and the things that I couldn't control. I couldn't control the sharks. If they were there, and I'd get pulled out, which would have been very disappointing. If I got hypothermia, I would have been pulled out, which again would have been disappointing. But I couldn't really control that. All of this was done, by the way, in a Speedo and a swimming cap and goggles. There was no wetsuit. So compartmentalizing the things we can control from the things that we can't control. And the thing that kept me going towards the end, when I was shivering furiously and I actually couldn't close my fingers, my hands started to claw just a little bit, which is not good if you're a swimmer. You kind of want your hands and your fingers together. Was the focus on why I was doing it and the outcome that I was going to achieve. And what I realized at the end of it all is that there'd been a WhatsApp group that we had started at the beginning of the swim, and it was open. We had posted the link on LinkedIn and on YouTube and Instagram. We probably had about 300-400 people that had joined this while I was swimming. I didn't know this, right? But the energy that had been created within that group, and I wasn't even aware of it at the time, was so incredible. We raised a bunch of money. We're still doing the fundraiser now, but we raised a bunch of money towards cancer and a couple of other causes. I didn't realize how what I was doing and what I was going through. And I never once thought I would give up or quit, because that's not a value that I hold close or anywhere near close. But it was tough and it was hard. Yet the way in which we kind of set that up and the energy that was being created in that WhatsApp group was just so phenomenal, and it led to that so much fundraising, that I guess the big lesson here is that, when you've got an ambition, you don't know where you are in your emotional journey even half the time. But even when you do know, and when you are aware of that, the impact it has on others around us is profound, is so deeply profound. And I'll often say to leaders, one day you'll retire, and, if you're lucky to be around young kids, whether they're grandchildren or whatever, they might say to you, who's your best boss and who is your worst boss? And people are going to ask that of people who report to you as a leader. And you have the ultimate control to that answer. You can either be a great leader or you can be a really terrible leader. And it starts with kind of your own inner ambition of the kind of person you want to be known for and the values that you're going to hold true. And that's kind of came through to me as I was doing that long swim. And I thought, you know what, right now, this is not about kind of walking out victorious on the other end to the sight of the cameras, but it's around being able to keep going, the determination, the persistence. And I would say the big thing, Brian, is being core to who you are and true to who you are, knowing what you want and then going after it with gusto.
Yeah, really powerful story from you there, Russell. And I just want to me, the word is amplify. We have no idea how much these experiences, when we share them with others, it amplifies the impact that we make on the world. And Russell, obviously you are driven in large part by positively impacting this planet, as many people as possible. And your experiences and sharing them with us here today have been so very insightful. This has been so much fun. Like I said, I'm already excited for listeners to dive deeper into the work that you do. So take this stage. Tell them where they should go from here to check out your work at the Ambition Company, your website, all that good stuff. Drop it on us.
Great. theambitionco.com, bad website now, good one coming really soon. And I'm very prolific on LinkedIn. I try and post a couple of times a week. Feel free to connect with me there. Let's have a conversation. Join the conversation. I used to be on LinkedIn, on Facebook and Instagram professionally, but I kind of found that became a little bit of a minefield. So LinkedIn and theambitionco.com is where I'm best found, and frequently on an airplane. So look me up. Let's get together.
Yes, I love it. Listeners, you all know the drill. Wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode, Russell has been incredible. I teased it that way at the top of today's episode, and gosh, did he deliver. So definitely check out his business website, theambitionco.com. You'll find that link down below. Read through his copy. It's going to re-energize you after today's session and reestablish those challenges that Russell has issued to all of us here today, and definitely connect with him on LinkedIn. It's actually how we came across Russell and his amazing work, his amazing thoughts. So find that link down below to his personal LinkedIn. Even if you just want to say thank you for him coming on the show today, that means so much to guests. You'll be shocked at how few people actually go out on a limb to reach out to people when they hear them speak somewhere.
Yeah. Can I just say that you are so right about that? You are so right. I started reaching out to people I heard on podcasts, and I thought, this is probably weird, but I just heard this person talking about something and I want to reach out. Some of the best connections I have made personally and professionally have been through doing that outreach. So please, I can't amplify that enough. It's great. I want to hear from so many people, and you do too.
100%. Listeners, I'm so glad I'm not the only one saying in today's episode. You just heard it from Russell himself as well. So don't be shy. Hit those links. Russell, on behalf of everyone tuning in today, thank you so much for joining us here today on the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.